Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff where one wrong move means falling thousands of feet into a mountain valley below. And now imagine that this is where planes land every single day, carrying passengers just like you and me. This is not a scene from an action movie, and this is not some abandoned airstrip from decades past. This is Lukla Airport in Nepal, and it is considered by many aviation experts to be the most dangerous airport in the entire world. The runway is only 1,500 feet long, which is shorter than many shopping mall parking lots, and it sits at an elevation of over 9,000 feet where the air is so thin that engines struggle to generate power. At one end of the runway, there is a sheer cliff that drops into a valley, and at the other end, there is a solid mountain wall. There is no room for error and no possibility for a second attempt at landing. Pilots get one chance and one chance only. But here is what makes this story even more remarkable. Despite all of these dangers, thousands of people fly into Lukla Airport every year because it is the main gateway to Mount Everest and the stunning Himalayan region. Without this airport, the dream of reaching the world's highest peak would be nearly impossible for most people. So why was this airport built in such an impossible location, and what secrets does it hold about human determination and the limits of aviation? Today we are going to take you on a journey to one of the most extraordinary places on Earth, and along the way we will uncover mysteries and surprising facts about aviation that will change the way you see air travel forever. Stay with us because what you are about to discover is both terrifying and absolutely fascinating. To understand Lukla Airport, we need to go back to the 1960s when Mount Everest was becoming more and more popular with climbers and adventurers from around the world. Before Lukla existed, getting to the Everest region was an exhausting journey that took weeks of walking through difficult mountain terrain. Climbers had to trek for days just to reach the base of the mountain, and many would arrive already exhausted before their climb had even begun. Then in 1964, a New Zealand mountaineer named Sir Edmund Hillary, who was the first person to reach the summit of Everest along with Tenzing Norgay, decided that something had to change. Hillary had fallen in love with the Sherpa people and the Himalayan region, and he wanted to help improve their lives and make Everest more accessible. So he came up with an ambitious plan to build an airstrip in Lukla. Now you have to understand how crazy this idea seemed at the time. Lukla is located in one of the most remote and challenging environments on the planet. There were no roads, no heavy machinery, and no infrastructure. Everything had to be done by hand, with local workers using basic tools to level the ground on a steep mountain slope. Hillary personally supervised much of the construction, and the locals worked tirelessly to make his vision a reality. The original runway was even shorter than it is today, and it was unpaved, just a dirt strip carved into the mountainside. When it was completed in 1965, it was little more than a rough landing zone, but it worked. Small aircraft can now bring supplies and people directly to the Everest region, cutting down the journey from weeks to mere minutes. It was a game changer for mountaineering and for the local economy. But building the airport was just the beginning of the story. The real challenge was learning how to operate it safely, and over the decades, Lukla Airport has seen more than its fair share of close calls and tragic accidents. The question that aviation experts continue to ask is whether the benefits of having this airport outweigh the very real dangers that come with every single flight. Let's talk about what makes Lukla so uniquely dangerous from a geographical standpoint, because understanding the landscape is key to understanding why this airport pushes pilots to their absolute limits. First, there is the altitude. Lukla sits at 9,334 feet above sea level, and at this height the air contains significantly less oxygen than at sea level. For aircraft, this means that engines produce less power, propellers are less efficient, and wings generate less lift. Everything about flying becomes more difficult, and planes need much longer distances to both take off and land. But at Lukla, there is no extra distance available. Then there is the runway itself, which is only 1,500 feet long. To put that in perspective, a typical commercial airport runway is between 8,000 and 12,000 feet long. At Lukla, pilots have less than 1/5 of the space they would normally have, and remember, they are already dealing with reduced aircraft performance because of the thin air. The margin for error is almost non-existent. But it gets even more challenging. The runway is not flat. It slopes upward at an angle of about 12%, which means that when pilots are landing, they are actually landing uphill. This helps slow the aircraft down naturally, which is a good thing, because there is a mountain wall at the uphill end of the runway. If a plane does not stop in time, it will crash directly into solid rock. There is no overrun area, no safety zone, and no second chances. On the opposite end of the runway, there is a cliff that drops over 2,000 feet into the valley below. When planes take off, they literally launch themselves off the edge of this cliff, and if the engines do not have enough power to gain altitude quickly, the aircraft will simply fall into the abyss. Pilots must commit fully to the takeoff because there is no aborting once they start rolling down that runway. The weather adds another layer of danger. Lukla is located in a region where conditions can change in minutes. Clear blue skies can suddenly turn into thick fog or violent storms, and the mountains create unpredictable wind patterns that can toss aircraft around like toys. Pilots often have only a narrow window of time in the morning when conditions are calm enough to fly, and if they miss that window, they might be stuck for days waiting for the weather to improve. There's also no radar, no instrument landing system, and no air traffic control tower in the traditional sense. Pilots rely on visual flight rules, which means they need to see the runway to land. They navigate by looking at landmarks, and they communicate with ground staff using basic radio equipment. It is old school flying at its most raw and unforgiving. One of the most surprising facts is that the airport only operates during daylight hours and only in good visibility. Night landings are completely prohibited, and if clouds roll in, flights are immediately canceled. This makes Lukla one of the few airports in the world where nature has the final say on whether planes can fly or not. Now let's talk about the people who actually fly into Lukla, because not just anyone can land a plane here. The pilots who operate these flights are among the most skilled and experienced aviators in the world, and they undergo specialized training that is unlike anything most pilots will ever experience. To fly into Lukla, pilots must have extensive experience flying in mountainous terrain, and they must complete specific training on the approach and landing procedures for this particular airport. Many pilots spend years building up their hours and honing their skills before they are even considered for Lukla flights. The airlines that operate here, such as Terra Air and Summit Air, only assign their most experienced captains to these routes. What makes flying into Lukla so demanding is that pilots cannot rely on modern technology the way they can at other airports. There is no autopilot landing system and no precision instruments to guide them in. Everything is done manually, with a pilot flying the aircraft by hand while constantly scanning the terrain and making split-second decisions. It requires intense concentration, physical skill, and nerves of steel. The approach to Lukla is particularly tricky. Pilots must navigate through a narrow valley with mountains towering on both sides, and they have to time their descent perfectly to align with the upward-sloping runway. They come in low over villages and terraced farmland, and they have only one chance to get the angle right. If the approach does not feel right, pilots are trained to abort and circle around for another attempt, but even circling is risky because of the confined space and unpredictable winds. Local pilots who have flown into Lukla hundreds of times say that no two landings are ever the same. The wind conditions change, the weight of the aircraft varies depending on cargo and passengers, and even small differences in temperature can affect how the plane performs. Pilots must constantly adapt and trust their instincts developed over years of experience. One of the most interesting aspects of Lukla operations is that pilots often fly the same route multiple times in a single day. During peak trekking season in spring and autumn, there can be dozens of flights shuttling back and forth between Lukla and Kathmandu. Pilots will land, refuel, turn around, and do it all over again, and the mental and physical fatigue from this intense schedule adds yet another challenge to an already dangerous job. Despite all the risks, the pilots who fly to Lukla often speak about it with a sense of pride and even affection. For them, it represents the pinnacle of their profession and a test of their abilities that few other pilots will ever face. They are part of an elite group, and they know that their skills make dreams possible for thousands of trekkers and climbers who pass through Lukla every year. As much as we admire the skill of the pilots and the incredible engineering that makes Lukla possible, we cannot ignore the tragic reality that accidents have happened here, and when they do, the consequences are often devastating. Over the years, there have been multiple crashes at Lukla, with causes ranging from pilot error to mechanical failure to severe weather conditions. In 2008, a small plane crashed during takeoff, killing all 18 people on board, including the crew. Investigations revealed that the pilot may have misjudged the aircraft's performance in the thin air, leading to a fatal loss of altitude just after leaving the runway. In 2019, another accident occurred when a small helicopter and a small plane collided on the ground during a particularly busy morning. 3 people were killed and several others were injured. This incident highlighted the challenges of managing multiple aircraft in such a confined space with limited ground control infrastructure. Perhaps one of the most well-known accidents happened in 2017 when a cargo plane crashed into a helicopter parked near the runway. The plane was attempting to land but appeared to have difficulty controlling its speed on the sloped runway. The crash killed 3 people and once again raised questions about whether safety measures at Lukla were adequate. What many people don't realize is that the majority of accidents at Lukla involve smaller aircraft and helicopters rather than the larger commercial planes. This is partly because the larger aircraft are flown by the most experienced pilots and are subject to stricter maintenance standards. However, even with these precautions, the inherent dangers of the location mean that risk can never be completely eliminated. After each accident, investigations are conducted and recommendations are made to improve safety. Over the years, the runway has been extended, slightly paved, and equipped with better drainage systems. Enhanced pilot training programs have been implemented and stricter weather criteria have been established for when flights can operate. Yet despite all these improvements, Lukla remains fundamentally dangerous because of its geography. For the families of those who have lost loved ones at Lukla, the pain is unimaginable, and the question of whether the airport should even continue to operate is one that sparks heated debate. Some argue that the economic benefits and the access to Everest justify the risks, while others believe that no amount of tourism is worth the loss of human life. If you ever find yourself on a flight to Lukla, the experience is something you will never forget, and I want to take you through what it actually feels like for passengers making this incredible journey. Most flights to Lukla depart from Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, early in the morning when weather conditions are most favorable. Passengers gather at the domestic terminal, which is much smaller and more casual than international airports. There is a sense of excitement mixed with nervous energy as people prepare for what they know will be an adventure. The aircraft used for these flights are typically small propeller planes that seat between 15 and 20 passengers. As you board, you will notice that the cabin is compact and basic with little of the comfort you might expect on a commercial flight. Luggage is carefully weighed and balanced because every pound matters when flying in thin air with limited power. As the plane takes off from Kathmandu, you begin to climb towards the Himalayas, and the view from the window is absolutely stunning. Snow-capped peaks emerge from the clouds, and you realize you are entering one of the most spectacular landscapes on Earth. The flight takes about 30 to 40 minutes, but it feels much shorter because you are completely absorbed in the scenery. As you approach Lukla, the plane descends into a narrow valley, and suddenly you see the runway ahead perched on a mountain slope with nowhere else to go. Your heart starts to race as the plane banks sharply, navigating between the peaks, and you understand why this is called an extreme airport. The pilots remain calm and focused, guiding the aircraft with precision towards that impossibly short strip of pavement. The landing happens quickly. The plane touches down on the upward slope, and you feel the brakes engage hard as the pilots work to stop before reaching the mountain wall. Within seconds, you come to a halt, and passengers often burst into applause, relieved and exhilarated by what they have just experienced. You have made it to Lukla. Stepping off the plane onto the tarmac, you are immediately struck by the cool mountain air and the realization that you are now in one of the most remote places on the planet. The small terminal building is bustling with trekkers, porters, and local residents, and there is a palpable sense of adventure in the air. You have crossed the threshold, and your journey to Everest has truly begun. Lukla Airport is more than just a dangerous runway in the mountains. It is a symbol of human determination and our refusal to let nature's obstacles stop us from exploring and achieving our dreams. The fact that this airport exists at all is a testament to the vision of people like Sir Edmund Hillary and the skill of the pilots who continue to operate there against all odds. It also reminds us that aviation, while incredibly advanced, still has limits, and there are places where technology must yield to human expertise, intuition, and courage. Lukla is one of those places where every flight is a collaboration between machine and human, and where respect for nature is not optional, but essential for survival. For the thousands of people who pass through Lukla every year, the airport is a gateway to something greater, whether that is the summit of Mount Everest, the beauty of the Himalayas, or simply a personal challenge to push beyond their comfort zone. And for those of us who may never fly there ourselves, Lukla reminds us that there are still wild and extraordinary places in this world where adventure and danger walk hand in hand. Thank you for joining us on this journey to one of the most remarkable airports on Earth. If you found this story fascinating, please share it with others who appreciate the incredible achievements of human aviation and the mysteries that still exist in our modern world. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious about the wonders that surround us.